concept of the employee. An employee, like an independent, there's this concept that the employee needs the employer more than the employee, right? So the justification for the power differential, that the employee needs the employer more than the employee needs, which is true if you look at it in terms of market forces. But that's, again, mainly due to the sophistication of the employee and their lack of organization in the majority, right? Where if employees organize properly and educate themselves well, they could actually equalize that disparity, right? So, a lot of these things are applicable. Invoice, the whole, especially this, I hire you personally, whereas I hire this business over, I don't want any other business, I want this juristic person. I want, like in a tender, we're choosing this specific business to provide the service. For me, there's no difference between that and no, we're choosing this specific individual outside of it. We don't want anyone else. Yes, the company, the juristic person has got employees, they can send any one of those employees, but it must be the specific juristic person. And those employees that they send, who can be anyone that works for them, must be someone that works for them. So I think the differences are they're legalistic in a way that complicates and I think enables the exploitation of the employee, which to me that's what it is. What's your take on that?
Look, I agree with you to an extent, but it cannot be applied across the board, because once I'm contracted, remember we are operating within the space of free market economy, and once I'm contracted to you as a service provider, you have a contract with somebody. The obligations and my interest, it's you as my employer who must make sure that as my employer, even if you are a juristic person, I'm protected, otherwise I can take you anywhere. Remember, this is a triangular arrangement. You have the employer, you have the contractor, you've got the employee. Now, if I encounter, violations or exploitation, who do I take to the CCMA? I take you as my contractor. And then I have to deal with you. You cannot say, no, I'm not, because we have an agreement. Where if you have issues with the primary employer, then deal with him. But me as working for you in your company, whatever, even if this client of yours treat me otherwise, and I'll hold you responsible. If you are incomplicit, you don't protect me, because you are duty bound to protect me. But on agreeing with you, yes, we come from that difficult history, and we still suffer in the remnants of our past. It cannot be. Yes, absolutely.
Actually, you okay. Let's get to unions.
Yeah.
Let's get to unions. In my article, I write that the Labor Relations Act, right, states its mandate, right? But the Labor Relations Act represents the rights of both the employee and the employer. Now, the employer is more powerful than the employee based on what we've discussed. And on top of their power, they're getting the Labor Relations Act's protection of their rights. So they've got their power, and then they're getting the Labor Relations Act. Whereas the employees is disempowered relative to the employer, and they're getting the same, not the same, but the same rights from they're getting the same protection from the Labor Relations Act. The sum doesn't equate, as you can see, right? You're already more powerful than me, already. Let's leave aside labor relations. You're an employer, I'm an employee. You've got the economic power, and you've got the decision-making power. Now the labor relations comes and says, but I represent the both of you. So you're getting protection on top of your power. And I'm getting it from my sort of lower position. That's not an equalization, is it? We just move a little bit up. The protection moves us a little bit up, but the inequality is still there. Would you say I'm looking at it right?
Yes, but the force and effect of the law is behind you. And interesting enough, remember the union is regarded as labor, that is the purpose. But on the flip side, the union is also an employer because it has its own staff. And the union is required also to treat their employees, fairly. At times, there are challenges where a union is brought here. They say, we are a union. They say, yes, but you've been brought here as an employer because you happen to employ to me and it's in your payroll. So when you look at that and you just juxtapose it with the employer, then you see that power, it's about power here. That power sometimes creates problems. Now, the employer has got those powers to make decisions, but the law steps in, other forums steps in an effort to neutralize or to balance that power. We may succeed.
Where I was getting at, and I think you are addressing it. I think you are addressing it.
Yeah.
To say that you have the CCMA, you have the Labor Relations Act, you have unions. Why does it seem like this inequality persists? It doesn't seem like. I mean, if you look at workers, unionized workers, right? When I look at a unionized worker, are they getting what they're supposed to be paid? Are they being paid fairly? I mean, not to mention the things that are outside of the employer's control, like the sophistication of the employee, of which, because every individual must be responsible for themselves, right? In terms of their ignorance, level of ignorance or lack thereof, when it comes to their rights and the laws. The laws are accessible to everybody. Arguably, if you put aside social inequalities, but you can't put those aside because that is the real world. So okay, you have that. What I'm saying is, it seems to me that with the CCMA there, the unions are there. The union, in my experience, I've never heard of, and I don't have that much experience, but I've never heard of the union being in the job interview. It doesn't come across to me as a normal thing, where in the job interview, you have the union there to sort of represent your side and what your interests are, right? In terms of getting the most you can out of the employer in terms of either pay and so on, right? You go to workplaces where you are forced to take a medical aid. You're given choices, but you are forced to take it in a specific way, right? Where they say, no, we have an arrangement with the service provider medical aid. Why can't I have my relationship direct with them and pay them, and sort of go out and take my own medical aid? So my point, I'm just using that as an example, all right? But my point is that it seems to me that they are not actually functioning to equalize and democratize the workplace.
Yeah. Look, for practical purposes, it's going to be a challenge for an employer to deal with various administrators. It's going to be a nightmare, an administrative nightmare to do that.
I see, yeah.
So then at times they will resort to one service provider for admin purposes. Imagine if you employ 10,000 employees, then they go all out to get their own, and sometimes others will change along the way. Yeah. It creates quite, and it comes with cost. And the problems and the challenges that you are raising are not only unique to South Africa, they are worldwide. And the ILO is at the forefront also trying to step in and assist. And, comparatively speaking, you will find that in South Africa, we have a voice as workers, at least. Yeah. And the law does recognize that. But in other countries, exploitation is the law. Yeah. You see.
The one thing I really liked in researching, that I found in the research that I've done, is that anyone can set up a union. You don't even have to register. Right? They encourage you to register. But where I read, the way I understood it, is that you can simply group together and represent yourselves as a collective, without necessarily, you don't need to register with anybody. But there is a path to register where if you register, then you have access to certain legal tools and so on and so forth that could, but it's not necessary.
Look, that's where the issue of free, freedom of choice, free market, it comes in there. Whether you associate yourself with a registered or not registered. But if a union is not registered, there are limitations. Because how are you going to represent if you're not a registered trade union?
Yeah, how are you going to, for example, well, I wouldn't worry. For me, I think the limitations are more sort of they pertain more to legal processes. Like if you want to strike, right? You're not registered. How do you apply for that? Who are you, right? Like, so things like that. But in terms of being, like, if you are a group of people in a company, right? I mean, bargaining is a matter of sitting down and talking. A legal process is more sort of just formalizing the thing. But practically speaking, you can do that. But in terms of, look, we want to now picket and strike, which is now becoming, you're having an impact on the public now. And the government is going to want, so now if you're not registered, it's going to become a bit of a problem, because how does the government engage with you?
But if you are a group of workers or employees, if you followed your Section 64 process, you had issues you brought to the CCMA, or there are unilateral change to terms and conditions, you have that election where you can also go on strike to try and force your rights. But if it's a union, it becomes easy and controlled and organized.
Yeah, it does.
These are people who have been trained, they are aware of this and that, and the union take the responsibility of, guiding and assisting, and if they have to exercise their, they may be, but employees are not necessarily barred from withdrawing their labor.
Yeah.
You can withdraw it as a collective, and remember, a strike, it's an action of more than one employee. Even the two of us can go on strike. But now the impact, do you make an impact?
Now, the final section of the CCMA interview, I'm not really going to begin where it starts, because it just carries on the conversation we're dealing with in the previous section. The first point that I'd like to highlight from this conversation is where I'm the one who's discussing and questioning the dominant understanding that the employee needs the employer more than the employer needs the employee. My understanding, that doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense. But I can see its function. I can see how that understanding serves the current social partners of the market, of the economy, in order for them to exploit their employee. But I mean, if you think about it for yourself, you start a business, you found a business, you register a company, you've got the funds. Do you have a business? Do you have do you have an enterprise? No. You need manpower to make things happen. You need manpower. You need people to make things and to work with you and to help you with admin and do all these things. Without those people, you don't have a business. So I think, it's a chicken and egg thing. Which one is more important, the chicken or the egg? They're both equally important. And this goes back to my point, that the employer is not more important than the employee, or vice versa. The problem with unions is that they suffer from an identity crisis. Mr. Pheko Molefe actually did say that sometimes unions are referred to the CCMA as employers. So this for me is a problem, and it speaks to what I was speaking to what I was focusing on, the issue of relationships. That is what is missing. The union doesn't know what kind of relationships to establish between its members, because it doesn't know what it is. Is it an employer, an organization that stands on its own, or is it Or is it the people that it represents? Is it an organization that represents people, or is it those people? And that's the same question that political parties need to be able to answer. That is, I think, it is what is key to a whole lot of other issues that are associated with the inefficiencies of organizations, right? One thing that Mr. Pheko Molefe said, he said that, the labor legislation is there to benefit, is there to be neutral, to be objective. It benefits both the employer and the employee. So my question was, okay, but how does that then equalize the employment relationship? And he said, well, it equalizes the employment relationship because the labor law is, what did he say? The force and effect of the law is behind the employee. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. I think I should have pressed him a bit on that, but I'm not sure exactly what that means. My understanding of what that could mean would be that the onus is on the employer to prove that a certain allegation by an employee is false. That was, I mean, if you consider, our discussion in the previous section when we spoke about the nature of the employment relationship, right? The onus is on the employer. Should an employee come in and complain about the nature of the relationship, that they've been treated like an independent contractor when they're an employee, right? The onus is on the employer to prove otherwise. So does that mean that, the force and effect of the law is behind of the employee? I can understand why he'd say that, if that's the case. But does it go far enough to deal with the inequality issue? I don't know, just because an employee can come and complain without evidence, I mean, that does give the employee a lot of power, but is that the kind of power? That's not the kind of power I have in mind. The kind of power that the employee currently has to run to daddy, right? To run to the state, to run to the CCMA. I mean, it has its uses and it works, and it probably has a place, but it's not the kind of power that I have in mind, because it doesn't address what I'm trying to address, which is the inequality between the employer and the employee. The kind of power I have in mind is the power for the employee, to better negotiate and manage the threat of power abuse from the employer, right? So that is for the employee to leverage his or her own market power, right, in order to negotiate a better deal with the employer. That's the kind of power that I have in mind. Right now, the employee does not have that power. The power they have is to run to daddy and cry that they've been bullied. They're not given the power to manage their behavior and manage their response to other people's behavior. They're not self-sufficient. In my describing this concern that I have to Mr. Pheko Molefe, he responded by discussing how impractical it would be for an employee to have representatives, or to have basically for an employee to have representatives that can empower him or her to better represent him or herself, because then the employer would have to be dealing with so many different quote-unquote administrators. And I think that is true. I mean, if you look at exactly how, okay, fine, he understands where I'm coming from, but by saying that, he's questioning how that can be possible, how that can be practical. That's what he's questioning, right? And, I do have my answer, my opinion, as far as that goes, and that's in the article that I wrote. So, like I said, I'm not going to say the solution here in order to direct you to my website. So, but I do have an answer to her question. He then moved on to talk about, well, I moved on to express what I liked about the current legislation is that it does not necessarily force anyone who wants to start a union to register that union. But it does discourage not registering that union. So it doesn't force you to register, but it does discourage it. And it does that by restricting unregistered unions to certain benefits and granting registered unions even more benefits on top of those. But basically this just goes down, and we discussed it with Mr. Pheko Molefe. It just goes to the ease of dealing with a fully registered organization, right? If a union wants to strike, there are certain legal processes it has to go through, and I've never gone through that process. But I would expect that involves filling in certain documentation, and in doing that, you'd have to be able to identify yourself. So, in identifying if a union is not registered, how does it identify itself legally? Okay, and I think that's a challenge there. I mean, an unregistered union can function within an organization, within an enterprise, to represent the interests of the workers there. But when it comes to now operating in greater society, how does society engage with you if they can't pinpoint what exactly you are in legal terms, right? How do they hold you accountable in legal terms? So I think, I do see the importance of registration, but so I'm not really questioning or challenging the importance of registration. I'm just saying that it does make it easier for employees to organize, and it doesn't force them to take interest in sort of wider issues outside of the workplace. Not to say that they shouldn't, but it doesn't force them to, which is great. Viva freedom type thing. I really did enjoy this interview. I was nervous as hell. I mean, I believe in my competency quite a lot. I'm not saying I'm a superstar, but I'm confident in who I am and what I can do. It's been a while since I conducted an interview for research like this, so I was pretty nervous. As you can see, if you can hear in the interview, I struggle to really put my points across, and I take a long time to put them across as well. So, but yeah, I'm quite happy with the way it turned out, and I am motivated to continue conducting this research until I've completed my mission. My mission, as I've stated, is basically to deal with issues around how citizens can empower themselves. And right now I'm looking at the employment relationship, because the employment relationship, in my opinion, is the core of the economy of the nation, of any nation, right? And it really goes to the organization of resources and the distribution of wealth and so on. So I'm starting there, but I do want to move. My next interview, I'm intending, once I've put this out, my next interview would be to speak to a certain, to get a different angle on this issue, right? I mean, I've spoken to the state, quote unquote, the state. I'd like to speak to the private sector. I've got someone in mind. We'll see if that works out, but if it doesn't work out, I'll try a few things. But the point is, I want the private sector lens on these issues that I present. I want to present, the same issues, and just get a different angle. The point of this also is just to test my thinking on these things. I'm not a professional in any of these areas. I'm not like an expert in any of these areas. So I really want to sort of get to the bottom of whether or not my thinking on these issues is viable, right? It has substance. So this will be a journey to watch, and I recommend you guys become members of my website. It's free of charge, just so that you can be updated whenever I upload anything on there.